This conference will now be recorded.
Madam Mayor, Madam Co-Chair, it is now 12:02. How would you like to proceed?
Yes, I think that we should begin our meeting.
Yes, ma'am. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I hope you enjoy the lunch that's provided today for our luncheon meeting. We'll follow up on that afterwards, though. But welcome to all of you for coming, and thank you for the input that you've had in your surveys and helping us gather the information that we need that we'll be discussing today in order to come up with a truly appropriate and productive legislative agenda. Let us start with the invocation. If everyone would just observe a minute of silence, please. Thank you. And now we'll say the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We are delighted with everyone who is here today. We are so thankful to Scott Dadson and Sarah Kopkin, pardon me, and their whole team in collaborating to produce this. This is an opportunity today for us just to talk with each other, to gain some information. We're lucky to have with us, and we'll introduce him in a little while, Mr. Chris Wall, who will be giving us an update on what's going on in Raleigh and Washington, D.C. We'll also be looking at the results of the survey that was sent out to try to get an idea of what are some of the things that are important to you in your towns and your cities. And also working to develop the 2021 isothermal legislature priorities. So I would like to say that Sarah is certainly our technical guru. So should you have any difficulties as we're communing with each other in this meeting, if you will just chat with her, there's a chat icon up at the top, or with Scott, to that matter, but that's a better way for us to communicate while other people are speaking. This is certainly not the easiest way to do a meeting, but it works very well. So if everyone can find that chat meeting up there, a little chat icon, you can communicate in that way. If you have a question you want to pose, many times that's the way to do it too. So Scott and Sarah will be supporting this meeting. They are gathering all the information, listening in to what we're saying, to what our thoughts are and our discussion is, and then they'll be actually formulating the legislative agenda. So we thank them for that, and they are truly the brains behind this meeting today. So we thank them very much. I'd like to go ahead and get started by giving a brief introduction of Mr. Chris Wall, who's going to be our first presenter. And I am going to say very few words about him and let him sort of introduce himself, except to say that Chris Wall is the founder and principal of EQV Strategic, which is a lobbyist firm. And one item, I'll let him talk about himself a little bit more, but one item I'm sure that he wouldn't tell you is that the Hill newspaper named Chris as one of Washington, D.C.'s top lobbyists in 2019. That's a hard thing to say about yourself. So I thought I would just slip that in, Chris, before we ask you to describe yourself and a little bit of your history and expertise to us. So I'll just turn it over to Chris now.
Thank you so much, Mayor, and I do appreciate that. I see that I definitely included that in the bio that I sent you, so apparently I'm not too humble. Right. But thank you so much, and to you and to Scott and to Sarah for having me here and letting you spend a little time. As the mayor said, I'm Chris Wall. I'm the registered lobbyist for the North Carolina Association of Regional Council of Governments. I've worked with your state association for going on 4 years now. I think at the end of this year, had the pleasure of getting to know Scott and his team and several of you on the call. Getting a lot more familiar with what isothermal is and the other regions within the state. One of the things I'm very proud of since our work with the association is raising the awareness of what the Council of Governments do with the General Assembly and working with my partner, Leslie Mazingo, on the federal level to increase that level of awareness as well. So really appreciate you guys and what you do and what you bring to the Council of Government, and your participation, makes it possible for those guys to have wins for you on the state and federal level. So just wanted to say thank you. As the mayor alluded, I've been in government affairs now for almost 20 years. Started my career off working on Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C., worked for 2 members of House of Representatives, and I worked for 2 United States senators. Did my last tour of duty for Senator Richard Burr, spent 5 years with him, where I handled a number of local government issues and economic development. Left Senator Burr's office in 2010 and ran the National Pork Producers Council. Hogs, always near and dear to my heart, right? You got to make the world safer for bacon. Ran their operation for 5 years, and I'm originally from Winston-Salem, and my wife's from Charlotte. And all of our family's still here, so it was time to come home. So in 2015, we moved back and kind of shifted my focus from federal lobbying to state lobbying, and again, had the pleasure of working with the association and the various COGs for going on 4 years. So, throughout my talk, and that's just pretty much what I'm going to do, please feel free to, put questions into the chat box or send me a note. I'm happy to stop and answer any questions about anything that I talk about or anything that I didn't mention. Nothing's out of bounds here. But what I thought I'd do is just kind of give you an overview of what's going on in DC, because that's really where the action has been for essentially the last month and a half since the General Assembly went sine die and recessed or shut down for the year. And I think everybody knows the biggest thing that we have been looking at is, after Congress passed CARES, is would we get that 4th COVID package? And we've had, and it's been a roller coaster ride, right? It's been a roller coaster just over these last 4 days. And we thought we were going to have a package. The House of Representatives passed what they called their HEROES package, which was, what is 3.3 trillion. It was bigger than CARES. The Senate Republicans were not in the mode to spend that type of money again after they passed the $2 trillion CARES package. And the president was kind of in the middle. So you had the House of Representatives and the Speaker who wanted to spend 3.3. You had the Senator McConnell and the Senate Republicans who wanted to spend around $500 million. And then you had the president in the middle at about 1.5 billion. And the three could never come to terms on the final package. We actually got just at the end of last week, they were about $200 billion apart for state and local funding, which, you say 200 billion, but in the context of a $3 trillion package, that's not a tremendous amount of money. And so I thought we were going to get very close. And then, as you can see, I think it was last Thursday afternoon, the president tweeted out that the deal was over, and he had told Republicans to stand down. He even backed off of that over the weekend and gave some remarks that would lead you to believe that the negotiations were still ongoing. And just as of last Friday, we thought that the package still had life, simply because the Senate was in dealing with the new Supreme Court nomination. But then, as we got into yesterday morning, the word that we got was it was pretty much dead at this point. So it is unlikely, highly unlikely, that we will see a 4th COVID package before the elections. And then the elections are going to have a major impact on whether we get that package after the elections, or if we can anticipate something in the first quarter of next year. Obviously, don't shoot the messenger. This is my, just my assessment of the situation and talking to various House and Senate leadership in Washington, D.C. I think if President Trump is reelected, then there's a high degree of probability that we will see a 4th COVID package come out of Congress before Christmas. I would even venture to say probably maybe even 2 to 3 weeks after the election, before December, we could get a 4th COVID package. If Vice President Biden is elected, I think the odds are more in favor of a package coming in the first quarter of next year. And I say that because, one, I think we can all agree that if President Trump loses, we don't have a real great idea of how he will serve out his remaining months in lame duck. You know, presidents do different thing, and there's no rhyme or reason as to how they'll handle that. But also, I think if the prevailing wisdom would be if Vice President Biden was elected, then there's a better than average chance that the Democrats have retaken the United States Senate. And then you would have a Democrat-controlled House, a Democrat-controlled Senate, and a Democrat in the White House. And it would be easier to get the package that they would like to put through by doing it first quarter of next year. So I think that's probably what you will see, depending on how the election goes, as additional federal monies coming and being available to you. That all impacts on what the General Assembly will do. If we do get a fourth COVID package, that will require the governor to call the General Assembly back in to distribute that money in a similar fashion that we did CARES. The governor has already indicated that if the federal government does send additional aid, that he will call the General Assembly back in. And I think there's a bipartisan agreement between the governor and the General Assembly leadership to do that. So I think you would see another CARES type operation where that was probably the best cooperation between the General Assembly and the governor office as Governor Cooper was elected, which was refreshing to see that that money did not turn political and got out as quickly as possible. But outside of the federal package coming back, it's unlikely that the General Assembly will come back in. I think if you look to, obviously the elections are going to have a major impact, not only at the federal level, but on the General Assembly as well. We've had a number of retirees, so the General Assembly will look fairly different than what it has, especially over the last 6 years, which it's been fairly stable for not only from a ratio between Republicans and Democrats, but just from a representation. You see the same faces year over year, and we haven't had much turnover. I think we're going to have a decent amount of turnover. We're not, I don't think, I know, just because of the retirements and the fact that they're running in new districts this year. And so that will impact I don't want to get into the elections too much because, again, it's just opinions and you read polls and everybody is probably as good a prognosticator as anyone. I think the prevailing wisdom is the Democrats will pick up some seats in the General Assembly, but that the Republicans will most likely maintain majority. And I think if you just look at the makeup of the districts, the Democrats just have a really hard road to overtake or take the majority. I think in the Senate, it's much different. That is probably going to be, a 1 to 2 seat majority either way. And again, I think a lot of that will be predicated on how the president performs in the state. If the president performs well, I think, Senator Berger and the Republicans will maintain a, 2, potentially 3 seat majority in the Senate. And if the president does not do well, then there's a decent chance of the Democrats retaking the majority in the Senate by that same 1 to 2 seats. And then if it's split, then, we'll have the lieutenant governor's race will just be even more important than it currently is, which I saw polling on that this morning, and they're deadlocked, dead even is the only poll so far that's been done on the lieutenant governor's race. But if you've got a 25-25 split, then it's the lieutenant governor that oversees the Senate and will be the ultimate tiebreaker for votes. So, and again, I think those are, tied to the president's performance here in the state. So, we'll look to see, the General Assembly will be very different next year. I think the one thing that we can say with some certainty is that the governor, whether it's, Governor Cooper or, if Dan Forest were to upset Governor Cooper, that the governor is going to be much more powerful even than this last 2 years of Governor Cooper. And if you think back when Governor Cooper was first elected and the Republicans held super majorities in both the House and the Senate, Governor Cooper was didn't have a lot of power to wield. He could veto bills, but then they could literally override the veto that afternoon. Fast forward to the 2018 elections, and the Democrats picked up some seats, and that brought Governor Cooper a tremendous amount of power back to where, especially to where he was from. And then if the Democrats are able to pick up additional seats, then that only strengthens the Governor Cooper's hand as well. But even if Lieutenant Governor Forrest were to win, then it would be the exact same situation for him with a Democrat controlled or a fairly close ratio, because the veto just is strengthened, and it takes more than probably what can be mustered by House and Senate leadership to override the vetoes. So that's kind of in a nutshell what's going on in Washington, D.C. and the General Assembly. Again, the elections are sucking the air out of everything that will be for the next few weeks. Talk a few things about what the association is doing as we look into 2021. Obviously, the COVID has had a major impact on our budgets, and I know you guys are feeling that more than anyone. I think some silver lining. We've gotten reports from the state that the shortfalls are not going to be as pronounced or as bad as initially thought at the beginning of the pandemic, but there will be budget shortfalls at the state level, no doubt. But some of the things that hopefully, we will see funding from the federal government, plus there will be funding at the state level that the association, the Council of Government Association, is looking is one. The first one is disaster preparedness, and we have been working very closely with the North Carolina Office of Recovery and Resiliency, INCOR, as you guys may know about it, on a host of different topics, and we have entered into discussions with them to be the training arm for disaster preparedness for our elected officials, to make sure that when disasters hit, whether they are natural disasters or biological disasters or man-made disasters, that our elected officials have the training, have the knowledge, have the plans in place that they can activate those when the disaster hits. And that goes across the state. One of the things that we have been successful on, that we were successful in adding some language to the relief package that the state put out, was making COGS eligible for disaster grants, specifically for FEMA funding. So that is something that you may want to talk to Scott about. If you are eligible for FEMA dollars, you can use the Council of Governments as the arbiter of that money, or you can actually assign them to act on your behalf and to draw the money down. So that was something that we were very proud of. Same thing for water and wastewater, is language that we were able to add in the package. We had it in the budget, but as you know, the budget was never implemented in the state, so we were able to put it in a different package. And that is the new grants for wastewater infrastructure, for assessments, repairs, understanding where your water and wastewater infrastructure systems are. And the Council of Governments are eligible for those dollars as well. So not only can you access them, the COGS can access them on your behalf and be the arbiter of the funds for you. So that was a success. That's something that we are going to continue to work on in 2021, along with disaster preparedness, because those issues aren't going away. In fact, our water and wastewater systems just become more important every day as the infrastructure continues to age. The good thing is the General Assembly understands that, and we'll continue working on that. And then the third one I think that's ubiquitous across the state, and something that's a big deal to you, is something that's been magnified with the pandemic and the public schools going to all virtual, is broadband and broadband deployment. And the General Assembly has come up with a couple of different ideas. The latest one is what they call the GREAT program, where instead of sending the money to local governments, they give the money to the carriers. However, they require the carriers to partner with a local government and approve. and the plans have to meet a certain criteria for them to be eligible. That program is still really in its pilot phase. The General Assembly, 3 years ago when they created that program, only put 10 million into it. It took a year before and it was only for tier 1 counties. That was expanded to tier 2 counties. Well, I may have to, I don't want to say that the budget expanded it to tier 2 or made tier 2 counties eligible, but that didn't pass. And I'll have to go back and confirm. I don't know, Scott, if you know, I can't remember if that was included in the CARES package, but that program has received an additional $45 million. So, and I think tier 2s are eligible now. So it opened it up to more local governments in the state. But that's something that we've been working with the General Assembly on, because even with these kind of out of the box programs, we still have, big gaps with broadband. The governor recently announced some funding, I think $45 million to provide hotspots for local governments, and the Department of Public Instruction received a tremendous amount of funds to upfit buses, upfit schools, upfit government buildings with hotspots and antennas to hopefully provide additional coverage. But as the mayor and I were talking about earlier this week, it's great if you have access. It's great if you have the bandwidth or the fiber or the signal coming to your house. But if you don't have a device to use it, then that doesn't work as well. So I think there's going to be renewed attention on providing school children with electronic devices, whether that's an iPad, whether that's a tablet or a Chromebook, I think, which has become really popular. Those are all things that I think are going to continue in 2021, and something that the association will be working with and trying to capitalize and maximize those on a regional basis. So you can have, better access to those programs. We've got a few other things working on the association level that just as far as internal controls of COGS, but haven't really decided exactly what we want to do with that yet. But those three, broadband, disaster preparedness, and water and wastewater, are our key issues heading into 2021, and hopefully to build on the successes that we had last year. So with that, I've talked a long time. I'll turn it back over to you, Mayor, and happy to answer any questions that you have or anybody else on the call has.
Well, thank you so much, Chris, and that's certainly insightful for us, what's going on, and lots of things sort of up in the air right now, and we'll have to wait to see how they turn out. I would like to say that Chris will be with us the entire time, and he is available for any questions. Easiest way is, once again, to go to the chat room and send your question that way. And so as we're talking about different topics, or you have different ideas about what is best for the legislative agenda, if you have it, just send it to him. We'll make sure to access his knowledge. Thank you, Chris, so much.
Thank you, ma'am.
You are certainly welcome. I think we'll move now to the results of the regional survey, and Scott Dadson is going to share with us what the results of those surveys was, so that we can have a starting point for our discussion.
All right, Sarah and I are going to tag team on this a little bit. The two biggest issues that we saw in the surveys were the post-COVID world, and when that transition will happen, what effect is it going to have on local revenues, and how we continue to meet, those kinds of things. How we continue to serve people, what's this going to look like? So that was a big issue that was raised. The second one, of course, is broadband. Broadband is a huge issue, especially as we get into the reality that we're just not well covered as much as we hoped in our region. So those were the two top ones. Sarah, did I miss anything?
No, I think you've covered a lot of it. I can share my screen if you'd like to pull up all the responses if you'd like.
Yes, why don't we do that real quickly, and we'll let everyone see what those responses look like.
Okay. Okay, let's see. Okay, so again, what Scott was just mentioning, the topics that we most wanted to discuss were broadband, as you can see, is always a big thing, and COVID again. And then there's a few mentions of affordable housing and rental codes and code enforcement. And for this question, the biggest response I got was from John Barrett with Fiscal Legal Services. He wanted to bring up that the Affordable Care Act open enrollment period for this year. And he kind of emphasized how you can reach out to Fiscal Legal Services for assistance or more information if you have questions for that one. Then for our top 3 policy issues for local government in the isothermal region, we have, again, housing, broadband, COVID, of course, and then more of the same, essentially wastewater, water infrastructure, which Chris talked about. Looks like we all have similar opinions on what are the needs here. Then our unmet needs for the local governments in the isothermal region, we have the roads and street repair and maintenance, aging utilities, financial support for infrastructure needs, erosion control and roads. Then our top 3 revenue issues for local government in the isothermal region were utility payments, lack of flexibility and greater authority over locally controlled revenues. Our tax base predominantly is private with little commercial base and very small population. Then our great topic for the year, COVID. So those are all the results I have from the.
Thank you, Sarah.
Yeah.
Thank you. Appreciate that. We're going to make this available to everyone, of course. This meeting is being taped, and we will, of course, all the results of anything we do will be put out. Our main way of communicating with you folks, just as a reminder, is through that weekly newsletter. If you're not part of that, please sign up for that. We really use that as a weekly, for those of us who have been managers or department heads or running a small operation, that's our weekly report back to the board and to our clients and members on what's going on, everything from sharing good news around the region to whatever results of meetings we have and the like. Matter of fact, this afternoon at 2 o'clock, our housing task force will continue on with its work as it moves forward on the discussion of the issue of housing within our 4-county region as well. So that's what we have as a result of the survey, Mrs. Co-Chair. If we'll turn it back over to you to lead the next part of the discussion, or if we can answer any questions, we'd be happy to do it.
Thank you so much. And once again, the same thing with Chris, Scott, and Sarah are both available as we're discussing. Should we need to have some information, so please feel free to send a question by chat or just to ask it if you're the one speaking. So I think, you know, the main purpose of this meeting is for us to be able to collaborate with each other's to get a good sense. We seem to have, there's some refrains that are the same for all of us, and there's certainly an emphasis here on COVID is first in our minds, but you know, as we look at some of the issues that the mayors and chairs legislative issues list, we see that some of the things, as in COVID, also comes under disaster preparedness. It affects education. It affects broadband. So it becomes very difficult to separate the impact of COVID from all these other issues. And so I think when we speak about these things with that in mind, we get to the point where we may be able to prioritize the issues that we want to be addressed and make sure that we are not focusing just on COVID, but looking ahead to see how that impacts us in the future as we move into 2021. So I think some of the other issues that have been brought up as far as being germane to the legislative issues, certainly under human services, certainly COVID. We recently had a bill passed on Medicaid transformation, and that certainly will have an impact on our state, but looking at Medicaid more as a managed care operation and the results that come from that, but also looking at perhaps next year Medicaid expansion. Those are things that are important to many people in the state of North Carolina. Particularly, there are more people after COVID because of people losing jobs, people in economic strife who are going to be eligible for Medicaid, and the point of that is including more people in Medicaid. Some other issues that have been brought up, which I think are very important, is mental health. Under those issues, certainly a focus on opioid dependency. Those two things are very difficult to separate, and I think those two things have a direct impact on both the amount of money that we have to spend on other health issues, the amount of money we actually have to address public health, mental health in a public health arena, but I think it also affects our ability to have employable people, which hurts our economic conditions. So I think those are important. Transportation, we are looking at certainly transit for education and health. We know that that has become increasingly important as people need to have access to health care. Many of our small towns, like Lure in particular, has no health care whatsoever. And so the ability for people to access health care for them, both from a standpoint of acute care and post-acute care, transit becomes increasingly important then. And then, of course, that brings us to our roads and infrastructure in general. We are looking at, in many times, both the roads, but infrastructure, terribly aged structures. Some, once again, I'll reference Lake Lure, infrastructures built well over 100 years ago, have not had the amount of money, not had the maintenance, not had the attention that they need, and are at a critical point now. So looking at roads too that give us all access, help increase people's not only ability to travel, but ability to get employees to work in towns. I think certainly managing our governments post-COVID, that's going to be important and came up certainly in many of the surveys. So those are issues. Broadband. So there's certainly a plethora of issues that are important for our legislature to look at. We are trying today to come up with a sense of what are the most important ones. We want to get everyone's opinions. Everyone's situations are different and yet very much the same. So I think we're going to start now with just an open discussion. And although this is easier sometimes when you're in person, we can certainly do it. And we have gurus, Sarah Kopkin, who can help us with that. So I'd like to open it up to anyone who would like to speak and to share with us what some of your ideas are as what our main priorities should be. Both Sarah and Scott are going to be, certainly the meeting is recorded, but in a general sense, they are recording these and we'll sort of assimilate all the different ideas that come up so that we come up with a much better idea of what we need to present as our legislative agenda from the isothermal region to the legislature. So is there anyone who would like to give us your some ideas that you have that might be important things for us to address? You can just raise your hand. Otherwise, it's hard for you to know. It's hard for me to know who would like to speak. This is like they say in school, if you don't volunteer, then we call on you. So let's just see here. If anyone would like to share with us, would you like to chat send a chat to Sarah and she can unmute you, or you need to unmute yourself, one of the two. John, are you unmuted now? Would you like to share with us? All right, we're going to need to come up with a better plan here, aren't we?
I noticed Fred Bazin is on the call, the chairman of IPDC. Perhaps we want to call on him first and see if he's got anything he wants to put on the table, any ideas.
Perfect. Fred, would you like to share with us? If you'll just unmute. There you go. Thank you so much.
All right. Well, the biggest thing that I see that the state continues to cut different revenue streams to the towns, and they don't give us any way to replace them. They're cutting our power funds by about 8%. And it affects a small town a lot more than it does a larger town because they have other revenue streams to offset things. So I'd like to see us push the state a little bit to put some kind of a sliding scale together and not one size fits all, and maybe look at the smaller communities by helping them with more revenue to fix crumbling infrastructure versus taking away from us.
Thank you, Fred. I think that's important to all of us. And that was actually one of the things on the list, was increasing the Powell bill funding to help us focus on those roads that need repair. I think we will, maybe we could hear from Freddie Harrell.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm just listening in. As some of you know, I'm with Withers Ravenel Engineering, and always I'm live in Cleveland County, and always have an interest in isothermal and the great job that you guys, Scott, and you guys do for this region. So I'm just listening, and I've been enjoying the meeting, and I love all the suggestions you guys have come up with. And I do especially like that suggestion on treating these smaller towns, looking at them under a different lens as far as the Powell bill funds are concerned. It's such, in some towns, it's such a percentage wise, such a larger part of their budget than the larger areas. So I think that's a great idea for maybe Chris and his group to look into. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Freddie. I think, you know what, why don't we just sort of focus on the topic of broadband? It affects us all, but everyone may have some specific insight or specific issues that they'd like to discuss. Is there anyone who would like to address that? Doug, we'll just call on you. How about that?
Well, I was kind of waiting. Scott said that I was not allowed to speak first when it came to these big group meetings, so I needed at least 2 people to go ahead of me.
Uh-oh, all right, well, you got 2 now. Now you're on.
Well, I'd be remiss as one of the co-chairs of the IPDC Housing Task Force Committee to not speak from a legislative agenda item that any funding we can gather for housing assistance, rental assistance, quality housing, affordable housing, or housing needs in general in the 4-county region. And I think there's a variety of ideas that are coming forth as goals and objectives from the work that our Housing Task Force Committee is doing, but the availability of funds, whether it be through tax incentive programs through the state or just direct assistance through HUD and the housing programs to IPDC for housing, is definitely a priority. And we've seen that exacerbated even more this year in a COVID environment. I think secondly, the ability to look at some resiliency funds to be more innovative of how we move forward from here. So how can the state look at this as they would for any other typical emergency management style funding, where, in the past you had a flood, you applied for funds to mediate the flood, and then you applied for funds to mitigate and be stronger and resilient on the backside. So how do we do that with COVID? Is that something that we can encourage our legislative folks to say, okay, let's treat this like we would any other emergency? COVID is not going anywhere. How do we better prepare ourselves as communities in a post-pandemic environment, or does this pandemic continue? And how do we innovate through that process, just like we would for natural disasters, for flood controls, better building codes for wind and rain damage, so on and so forth. To speak to your question about broadband, I liked what Chris was saying, that there's an opportunity for the providers to work with communities, because that's one of the things that we see here is we just don't see the ability for providers to work where they don't want to stretch that extra, half mile or a quarter mile or even eighth of a mile to a home. When we look inside the city limits of Rutherford, a lot of our homes do have good access to internet, but there's always room to expand that in our region, in our area. And when we expand that here, it means that there's better speeds and better bandwidth. You know, that's one of the things we struggle with now, is just the bandwidth for that. I don't know that Rutherfordton's ready to jump into internet service like some of our other peers in the state have done, but it's definitely an issue. And now that we have more people working from home, students working from home and remote learning, you know, how do we do that? I mean, so much as a temporary Band-Aid, what we've run into is, you know, even the mobile jetpacks. We have students coming to our library because they don't have cell phone coverage at their home. You know, they've been given a mobile data pack, but it's useless because it doesn't have a signal. And so it's not just access to mobile broadband, it's access just to any type of connectivity. How we solve that, I don't know, but I like the idea of making the major carriers work with local jurisdictions to at least hear the problems.
Thank you. I agree with that entirely. And as I said, I think all of these are overlapping issues. From broadband affects education. It affects our ability, as you said, which is a very good thing for us. One of the things that has come out of COVID is we find many people moving to North Carolina, away from big cities, and many times intending to work at home. But along with intending to work at home means that you have to have connectivity. And so I think that that is a major deterrent to us in people moving here and people being able to work from home. So I agree with you on that one. I also agree on the treating the COVID as a natural, as we would with natural disasters, with preparedness, disaster preparedness. You know, we will get through COVID eventually. It certainly is a unique biological disaster, and we're not through it yet. And I think we all realize that. But in order to be prepared for the future, we certainly do need to have plans to be better prepared, and there will be other COVIDs that will come. So we need to have plans in place and how we deal with that, so we're not just always trying to keep our heads above water on each and every issue that comes up. So I think all those things try to go in together, and I think we need the funding, and we need a good plan where that's concerned. Anyone else have any issues or any input they'd like to about broadband in their particular area, or how it affects you, or the COVID?
Mayor Pritchett.
Yes.
Hey, this is Scott Weber in Spindale. How are you?
I'm fabulous. How are you?
I'm doing great. Not specifically on broadband, but wanted to touch base back on infrastructure for just a second, if we could. Specifically, of course, funding for replacing some of probably all of our aging infrastructure. And I know Chris touched on infrastructure and packages that could or could not, you know, materialize in the future. And I think I missed a couple of his comments just because I had interruption. But two questions really, or thoughts, is one, on the Clean Water State Revolving Fund that's currently in place. Is there an opportunity there to work with our legislators to try to extend the terms there from 20 years to 30 years? That would certainly make the debt service payments a lot more tolerable. You know, USDA, for example, will go out as far as 40 years. So would that be an option to just get a little bit better terms there on CWSRF funding? And then secondly, does anybody see, I guess back to infrastructure packages, does anybody see an infrastructure package something similar to what we had in 2009 with the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act coming down the pipe?
Chris, can you add some some insight on that topic for us?
Yeah, happy to. So first off, to your question about extending the rate repayment terms, that's something that we can absolutely have the conversation about, right? I haven't ever been a part of any conversations where I can tell you I have a good sense of where the General Assembly would be on that. I can't tell you what the likelihood or how big of a lift, but it sounds certainly reasonable, especially if USDA extends it to 40 years, right? That gives us something that we can point to. On your second question about, a stimulus package, and we all remember, the shovel-ready projects and the signs that went up everywhere. This project brought to you by the Stimulus Act. I think what you will see is there's going to be a large infrastructure package. No matter who wins the presidency, there's going to be a large infrastructure package from the federal government first, second quarter of next year. And I think it's got bipartisan support. It's going to be a large infrastructure package. And I think you're going to have a lot of opportunity to address your needs in that. As far as, it's just going to be focused on infrastructure, though, is everything that I'm told. A broader, all-encompassing stimulus package like we saw in 2009, I don't know that we will see something like that, but I think you will see pieces because in addition to the fourth COVID package, which, is coming from the federal government, it's just, a matter of when is it coming. I think there will be additional COVID relief packages throughout next year, especially as, budgets and the pandemic continues to go on. All the various reasons and challenges that this thing continues to throw at you. So I think there will be additional resources, but it's going to long-winded way to say it's going to be more piecemeal than one broad package.
Thank you, Chris. I think that's important too. One of the things that Scott and I were talking about yesterday, and Chris too, is the availability of money for infrastructure capital projects, which can be just huge and too large, too expensive to be able to service the debt with just the number of people you have paying taxes in your town. So, some of the projects, are up $65, $75 million. And so, what are your thoughts at all, if you have any, Chris, or anyone else, on the possibility of availability of money, not in the form of loans, but more in the form of, and grants we usually think of as being more in the, from the $50,000 to $100,000 range. But now we're talking about grants either from state or federal government to that point to help with some of these massive infrastructure projects.
Well, I can, I'll jump in on that quickly. I think you saw the General Assembly with CARES Act as we got the initial monies that they put on the streets were a lot of loan programs, a lot of low interest loan programs. But after there toward the end, as they were spending the final dollars, they turned more into grant programs than loan programs. And even the federal government with, when you're talking about the economic development pieces, the PPP loans and some other small business administration efforts that they put in, they did put contingency plans or repayment plans that if you met the certain criteria, they were grants instead of loans. So I think, there is precedent, and there does seem to be a mindset of turning things or increasing grants as opposed to loans. I'm a little hesitant to think that the infrastructure package will be that way, though. I think I think Congress looks at it through two lenses. We've got an infrastructure package, and then we've got COVID relief. And for COVID relief, which is anything that's their lens, the way they attack that is, what does it do to stop the spread of the disease, right? Or the direct impact from the economic impact from the response, i.e. businesses having to shutter. So that's anything outside of that, they don't consider COVID relief. And I'm wondering if they leave the grant process, the grant increase through the COVID relief, and they continue with their loan funding through the infrastructure package. The one thing I think the additional wrinkle that we have here in North Carolina is the issues that our Department of Transportation has had, especially this year. And I think if everybody saw the Treasurer's Office released, was it 400 billion in bonds, or 400 million to jumpstart about 45 projects that were on hold because of the $700 million shortfall that the state was going. That's still going to have an impact on projects throughout the state and funding throughout the state. The General Assembly, I think, is they've kind of adopted the Connect Beyond model of funding these projects, but they just, 2 weeks ago had a big hearing in Raleigh where they heard 5 different plans on how to address transportation funding going forward, because the trust funds and the gas tax just aren't going to give the same certainty that they have, up until now, with cars getting better gas mileage and people just driving less because of COVID. So there are going to be changes on the state level in addition to what we're going to see from the federal government.
Thanks, Chris. Anything else that anybody, as I said, we all seem to be focused pretty much on the same things, which is not a bad thing, because what we're trying to do is focus on those things which affect all of us, which we have maybe the greatest chance of pleading our case to go on the agenda for the legislature. One of the things that we did not talk too much about was managing our government after COVID, which was a topic that's been brought up before and has, somewhat to do with our preparedness, but also as we look at the fact that, there definitely is going to be a reduction in revenue for the towns and the cities. Most people cannot possibly be unscathed by this. Some people are not at work and will not return to work, which increases the dependency on our state both benefit system, whether it's healthcare or affordable housing, which is certainly important to all of us. So any ideas on that, on how, moving forward, how we sort of address those issues? Good. Well, I'm going to call on all of y'all then, if you already know how to address those issues, when we figure out how to cover all our unemployed people. Sounds good. We have an opportunity here, and it is an opportunity for us to present from our region, from these counties, the things that are most important to us. And certainly everybody is going to be vying for the same dollars. And you always hear that you're competing with, you name it, you're competing with anybody else in this state, Raleigh, anywhere else. But I think we are a unique part of North Carolina. We have some unique problems here that are not the same. Not to say that they're certainly more important to us. They may not be more important to other people. But I think the more that we can come together as a group and have a consensus of those things that we would like to be put on the agenda, the more likely we are to get some response. So this will not be our last time that we will talk about this. This was the introduction today. We wanted to get a good feel for what people felt was important. And we want to continue that. And as we continue to build towards what we present, Sarah and Scott and their entire team will be, as I said, collaborating with all the information that we've gotten, getting a sense of what it is that's important to people, what we would like to see there, and they will be formulating our agenda that we'll be presenting. Scott, is there anything else you'd like to add right now, either you or Sarah?
Thank you. I would add a couple of things. One, we're working towards 2 ends here. One is an adoption by the IPDC board of the legislative platform, the regional legislative platform, at their December meeting. And then secondly, a presentation of that at our legislative breakfast event. This will be our 4th one, I guess now, in late January, early February. And the reason that that's still flexible is that we always reach out to, we're fortunate to have the speaker in our region, but we reach out to his office to talk about beginning dates of the legislative season. This will be the beginning of the 2-year. They'll have new players in place and all of those kinds of things. But we try to reach out to find the best date. We always pick a Monday morning. People ask me why we do that. Our board felt it was important to do it in such a way that we get them not in their personal time on the weekend when they're home, but on their way to the legislature. So Monday mornings, they come to our breakfast. And folks who have been part of that have known that they show up, they talk not only from the dais, but also in and amongst the crowd. And you all have this great opportunity to meet them at one time, all of our legislative delegation. Secondly, they're able to do that in the morning and then be on their way to Raleigh on a Monday afternoon. So those are the two deadlines we have. We're going to go ahead as a staff and assemble this information, put it together in a draft form, and communicate back with not only the people on this call, but all of our membership and the mayors and chairs in our region, so that we, as the mayor said, we can continue to refine this and put this together. And we'll do that in short order. We'll probably be out the first of next week for everybody in some form of draft form. And we will work with the two mayors to coordinate how they want to follow up with this with the group. Maybe put it back out in a survey again, maybe put it back out for comment, maybe have another virtual get together like this to talk about various issues. And managers and clerks will be on the lookout for this stuff too. We try to double up and gift you guys in this as well as the legislative staff for our region, and try to get that to them so that they can be reacting as well.
Thank you, Scott, so much. And you know, I would say I think it's so vitally important that we are a part of a group here, the isothermal region, that, you know, we all do have the same, in some sense, many of the same needs, and we're all looking for the same money, but each individual person is just trying to access you know, the legislature. It really just doesn't have the same amount of clout, if you will, as if we are all together and we're talking about what the needs are of our particular isothermal region. So I appreciate so much all of your time. I certainly appreciate Scott and Sarah. Thank you so much for doing this. And this is just the beginning. We're just beginning to have this conversation. If there is anything else that you think of, please feel free to submit it. You don't have to wait for another survey. We'd love to have an opportunity to talk about it. Chris, thank you so much for catching us up. I'm sure we will be accessing your knowledge and your context a lot in the future. So I think that that is all right now. Scott, if you don't have anything else, or Sarah, then I think we will call this our first successful communication about what our needs are for the isothermal region. Thank you all for participating.
Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, everybody.